Let's get started. Hi everybody, my name is Lauren. I am the newest member of the Mill City Education and Training team. I have been with the company for just a little over 2 months, and I guess my goal of being here is to really try to bridge the gap between what our customers and our students know about roasting and learn from us about roasting, and bring a lot of education into their experience from the cafe side, from the perspective of a barista and a barista trainer. A lot of our students have really long-term goals of opening cafes or having wholesale accounts and being wholesale roasters. And so I kind of view my role here as being kind of a part of providing a common language where roasters can really start to understand what people are looking for in cafe experiences. That means understanding really how people are going to extract their coffee, how customers are going to be tasting their coffee, and what baristas want to know about how coffee was roasted. All of that are, from what I've experienced so far in the industry, things that are kind of missing. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I've been in the coffee industry for a little over 12 years. I started, like many other people, at a small coffee shop. It was actually a student-owned and operated cafe at a bookstore at my college campus, where I received very, very little education about coffee. I was told not to taste espresso, that espresso is gross. And I learned really just how to deal with high volume, work a cash register, and keep things clean, which are really great foundational skills for baristas. In 2010, I moved to Portland, Oregon, where I worked for a really, really high-end specialty craft, what we would consider really third wave espresso cafe. And that's where I was introduced to the much broader world of specialty coffee. That's where I got really into coffee competitions. It's where I developed a really good palate for espresso, and I started getting interested in training and education. I was with that shop for long enough to move up the ranks, eventually becoming the assistant manager there and developing a training program and becoming their trainer. And I only left that job so that I could do more teaching full time. I went to work for a pretty large wholesale roaster in Portland, who has been established for about 21 years. They roast a little over 2 million pounds of coffee a year. And I was brought on as their wholesale educator, and during the time that I was there, we opened 5 retail cafes, and I became their primary retail educator. So my background pulls on a lot of my own experiences as a barista, but over the course of my career as an instructor, I've learned how to engage with people who have very, very different levels of experience and comfort at the espresso bar. I've also stayed very involved with competitions. So the United States Barista Competition and the World Barista Competition are 2 arenas that I've been heavily involved with. I now work as a head judge for the USBC. I'm a committee vice chair for the Barista Committee, and I'm a certified World Barista Judge and a World Brewers Cup Judge. All of that has, again, helped me really calibrate a standardized language and a way of talking about my experience in terms of flavor quality and communicating that to people, whether that's roasters or baristas who want to learn more or customers who want to become better tasters, and helping all of them sort of speak the same language and use really the same vocabulary when we're talking about quality and flavor. So here at Mill City, I'm teaching a lot of barista classes now. We just launched our whole barista training program. About every 3 or 4 weeks, you'll see our Espresso Bar Skills for Coffee Professionals class become available online. That class satisfies all the requirements for the SEA Barista Foundations level, as well as the Intro to Coffee exams. But really my focus with that class is to help roasters train their staff, whether that's their retail staff or their customer account managers, or maybe it's just, a one-man or one-woman operation, and they just want to be able to talk about their coffees to a much broader audience. That's really what that class is about. It's about training, learning how to dial in, learning how to use the espresso machine, and just getting comfortable with all of this language. So this is part of our back and forth series. We're going to be going back and forth from the roaster to different methods of extraction that you might see at a cafe. And we're trying to, again, really bridge that gap between what a really excellent roaster like Derek does on a roaster with green coffee to what a really skilled barista might do, especially if they're given more knowledge and learn a little bit more about what happened to that coffee beforehand. In my experience as a trainer, I know that baristas, if they're lucky, receive a lot of information about coffees. I'm talking about origin, elevation, wash process, maybe micro lot or the farmer's name. But usually, and this was my experience too when I worked as a barista, we don't know a lot about what happened at the roaster. And that's because we don't really know anything about roasting. Very few of us will ever have a chance to roast coffee ourselves. And there's just a disconnect there. We kind of think, okay, this coffee has gone from green to brown, and now it's in my hands, and it's my turn to make it delicious. But there's a lot that happens at the roaster that can set a barista up for success or failure. And if you're a roaster and you're not tasting your coffees on the bar, if that's how they're meant to be extracted, we're talking about espresso blends in today's case, or on the pour over bar or on a batch brewer, then you're really doing yourself a disservice because you're not getting a lot of tangible evidence about how your roast profile is helping you or hurting you. So what we thought would be interesting for this video is to start with two wildly different coffees. If you were watching our video on Monday, you would have seen Derek on our 500 gram sample roaster roast 3 batches. He roasted 3 coffees. He started with a single origin, natural Ethiopia Aricha, which he wanted to taste as espresso. That's what he called Derek's blend or D's blend. This would be pretty wild as an espresso, a single origin espresso offering, but not uncommon to see in a craft kind of focused third wave coffee shop right now in 2019. As a judge, I can say that a lot of coffees like that are what we taste at competition because those are some of the most unique, most flavorsome, and most interesting coffees for competitors to show to judges. So that's one of the coffees that we're going to brew today is espresso. Here on the Mazer, we've got Derek's blend, the natural Ethiopia Aricha. On the K30, we have Lauren's blend. This is a pre-roast blend that Derek put together with components. I got them written down so I don't forget. He started with 40% of our Brazil, 40% of our Guatemala, Huehuetenango, and a final 20% of Tanzania. All of these are, well, 2 of these are washed coffees. The Brazil is a pulp natural. And I can say that on average, from what I've seen at different retail cafes around the country, this is going to be a pretty familiar blend to a lot of us. It's got some South American components, a little African component for highlight. I'm going to be looking for some nice base notes from that Brazil, some nice acidity brought in from that Guatemala, and a little bit of floral pop from the Tanzania. At my previous company, that big wholesale roaster, we worked with a blend which was very, very similar. Something like a Mexican and a Brazil roasted together, and then an Ethiopian thrown in at the end. 3-bean blends are very common, and they're very approachable for a lot of customers. So my approach as a barista on bar with these coffees is going to be pretty different. I don't want to pretend to have, a rule book for people to follow, but when you're a trainer, people really want numbers, right? And we see this all the time in our roasting classes. People want to know, what charge temp should I start with? What should my development time be? Exactly what minute should I be entering first crack? And you probably hear Joe and Derek talk all the time about how those numbers don't exist, right? Because everyone's running a different type of machine. Everyone's experience is really different. So what we can provide instead of, hard numbers are ranges, right? Or acceptable kind of zones that are going to be good places to start out in. My approach with a blend is pretty on par with what we kind of consider now to be like the espresso recipe. It's one of the standard espresso parameters that are defined by the SCA. I like to start with between 17 and 18 grams in, looking for a pretty solid 2 ounces out. That's usually close to 50 grams or 55 grams out. And I like for that to happen in between 25 and 30 seconds. Usually on the latter end of that scale, like 27, 28 seconds, that's kind of where I'm happiest. If I can get all of those things happening and it's a good extraction, I'll end up with a coffee that has medium weight, nice round body, a good kind of chocolate undertone with a little bit of sparkling, pleasant acidity that lifts up any inherent bitterness that we'd find in the coffee. That to me is a very good or even excellent espresso, to use scoring terminology from the United States Barista Competition. I like a little bit of a longer extraction for that blend because I've got 3 very different components in this coffee, and all of these coffees are different elevations, which means that they have slightly different densities. What's cool about these 2 coffees side by side is that Derek followed the same roast profile for both of them. He started with the same charge temp, he entered first crack at a similar time, and his development time, which was really the main focus, I think, of his roast on Monday, was the same. Both of these coffees ended the roast at the same temperature and within about 30 seconds of each other, which is pretty unique. Because this coffee, the Ethiopia, is a higher elevation, natural processed, single origin from Ethiopia, like I said. Approaching a coffee like this on an espresso bar, a barista like myself might be inclined to run a slightly shorter extraction, which is what I'm going to do today. My theory behind that is that with fewer components and more kind of straightforward flavors from just one coffee, I want to kind of get in and get out. I don't want to have too much contact time with the water because I risk over extracting it. And a natural coffee on the cupping table is going to have really great fruit and berry flavors, but on the espresso bar, its inherent high acidity is going to be really amplified, and it can be dialed up too much to the point where it becomes a little unpleasant or out of balance. So what I did before I got started is pulled a few shots and kind of got this coffee within, I think, a starting range. Very much like what a barista would encounter when they came onto a shift or were even opening a coffee shop, coming in and pulling those first few shots of the day. It's not perfect, it's not exactly where we want it to be, but that's good, because for today's video, I want to talk through my process of getting these dialed in and talk about how that roast profile and that roast recipe influences the decisions that I'm making here. I've got a 2-group Nuova Seminelli Black Eagle. This is our lab machine. We're very lucky to have a very nice, high-quality espresso machine. A couple of important points about this machine. It has just received some of its regular preventative maintenance, meaning that our tech just came and did a once-over a little bit ago to check all of the valves, the gaskets, our water lines, our pump pressure. Everything's in good working order, and it gets cleaned regularly. Now, this might kind of seem like a given, but sometimes when people are in classes with me, they'll say, oh, my espresso doesn't taste very good, or my first couple shots of the day don't taste very good. And a lot of times, they're not taking proper care of their equipment. So I wanted to mention that this machine has been maintained and cleaned properly. It's also been, had some coffee ran through it, right, which is important. Baristas will call that a seasoning shot, a shot where you get some coffee oils on the group heads and on the portafilters, and that minimizes any really metallic flavor you're going to get from an empty metallic brew basket sitting in a hot metallic group head. So by pulling a couple shots before we start, I can get a general sense of time frame and how everything's extracting, but what I'm really doing is just priming these groups and these portafilters to have coffee in them. Not unlike cooking with cast iron, right? You want to make sure that it has some nice seasoning and some nice oil on it before you get going. Otherwise, everything's going to stick and it's going to taste not great. We've got a couple angles to help us hear the shot today, so I'm going to try to keep some things off the drip tray so people have access to our espresso shot camera. This will help you all watching along see what I see in terms of how the shots are pulling, how the colors are changing, and how fast the liquid is flowing. So, how's that sound? Any questions yet?
People love your hair.
Oh, thank you. It's a new cut. All right. So I thought we could start with the blend because that's kind of a comfort zone for a lot of people, and it's what a lot of baristas are pulling for the majority of the day. An espresso blend is going to be, for most shops, the default. What goes into your milk beverages, especially your flavored drinks, any of your mochas, your vanilla lattes, anything with the house-made syrup. You want to use something that has enough depth and enough character to cut through large volumes of milk and other sugary ingredients. So the blend is what we usually start with. Perfect. So I've got a 17-gram dose here now, which is a great place to start. I'm going to distribute, tamp, and pull this first shot and just get a general sense of how fast it's pulling. Some numbers that I like to kind of pay attention to and watch are drop time, which is the delay between when we press this button and when we first see liquid come off those spouts. For this shot, it was about 8 seconds, which is great. Measuring by volume here, I'm just approaching 2 ounces, and that took 29 seconds. So right at the end of that time frame of kind of what I like to see for my house blend. I'm gonna go ahead and taste this shot and see if there's anything that I would like to adjust. I'm not talking too much today about how to pull an espresso, how to dose and distribute and tamp, and how I'm inserting and immediately brewing. All of that is important, but it's kind of Espresso 101. And for these videos, we don't want to do so much of a brew guide or a brew demonstration, as we want to kind of create a conversation around how this coffee tastes and how it's being extracted with how it was roasted. Yeah, that's actually pretty nice. So this espresso is kind of medium to lightweight. It has some nice dark chocolate notes and a little bit of acidity. The acidity is a little fleeting, so it goes away quite quickly, and I have a little bit of bitterness in the finish. This is the kind of language that I would use if I was calibrating judges at a competition, right? On a scale of 0 to 6, 0 being totally unacceptable and 6 being extraordinary, wow, life-changing, a god shot, literally the best espresso I've ever had. I would say this is 2.5, which in our vernacular means average or average plus. When I ask myself, how can this espresso be a little bit better? Good, which would be a 3, or even a 4, which would be very good. I have to think about the experience that I'm having right now. I said it was a medium to light body, so getting it to be a little bit more medium in heaviness or weight would be better. I want my espresso to have some weight to it, especially if I'm going to be adding milk. I also talked about that lingering bitterness, which I think is not unpleasant, but it could be cleaner. And I think by getting rid of some of that lingering bitterness, we could enhance the sweetness. I think the acidity from the Tanzania is coming through in a really, really lovely way. So I don't want to tamp that down at all. I don't want to diminish that. Couple kind of key espresso tenets are, and this is true for all methods of brewing coffee, over extraction, where you've just run a little bit too much water through the coffee or you've had too much contact time with the coffee, is going to create a thin body, lightweight texture, and increased bitterness. Under extraction is the other end of that scale. So we're gonna see if you haven't really run the shot for long enough or you haven't added enough water to your pour over or to your cup of coffee, you're gonna get kind of a syrupy, kind of coating, sometimes grainy or heavy body, and you'll get a little bit more acidity than you want. Sometimes you can get saltiness. Salty espresso is truly unpleasant, and I hope that nobody has to experience that. It's very, very bad. What I think I'd like to do with this coffee is just extract a little bit less. I'm gonna stop that shot a little earlier to try to clean up that bitterness in the finish and to try to enhance the texture or the weight of this espresso. I don't like to let pucks sit in the portafilter, so I'm going to empty this out. But a pretty big point that I like to make with baristas who are working at a retail cafe is you can't have a favorite side of the espresso machine. So because I just used that right side, I'm going to move to the left group. One thing that's great about the roasts that Derek did on Monday is he really focused on development time. So what you're seeing in this coffee blend is a nice medium roast, right? I don't know where to really hold this to make it very visible. How's that? No, kind of like that. So it's a blend. We have a little bit of kind of some like multicolor happening there because we have different coffees, obviously, but we have no surface oils, no really dark browns verging on black, certainly no like purple colors, and we can still see a little bit of coffee chaff in the seam of those coffee beans, which means they haven't been taken super dark, which is fine. It's a medium roast. But if we break these beans open, which we should be able to do by hand, we can see that that roast color goes all the way down to the center of the bean. And this is what people miss a lot in specialty or, you know, lighter kind of Scandinavian style roasts, is they're just looking at that outside color and thinking about that in terms of darkness or development. What they're missing is what's happening on the inside of the bean, the color that you see below the surface. So I like to look at the grounds, right? This is the whole bean, all ground up. And it's a really beautiful chocolate brown color. A little bit of kind of an orange or a reddish hue. And that tells me that it's just really well developed. And the brittleness of the bean also kind of confirms that. So I know that I'm not struggling to extract solubles in this coffee like I would be if it was a little bit underdeveloped and it had been roasted a little too quickly. Oh, I took some of my dose out there, so I gotta get a little bit more. I'm trying to get back to 17 grams. A good rule of thumb for dialing in any method of extraction is to only change one variable at once. For this next shot, I want to extract less, and that simply means I'm going to pull less water through the machine or through the portafilter, and I'm going to stop my shot a little bit shorter. So because I'm doing that, I am not also going to change the grind or change the dose, how much coffee is coming out. Those are two other variables that would also affect my coffee. But if I get into a zone where I'm changing a lot of variables at once, then I won't know what helped or what hindered me, and I'll kind of be chasing my tail. A little bit of a slower drop time this time. I had 9 seconds. The previous shot was 8. Got really beautiful color, and it's pulling in a way that's really controlled. It's not gushing, it's not rushing out of the spouts, and it's blonding nicely, and I'm going to stop it there. So I'm actually just below 1 ounce here, which would give me a total volume of probably 3 ounces as opposed to a total volume of 4 ounces, and that shot pulled in 27 seconds. Smells really good. It smells really sweet. A big part of the classes that I teach are focusing on sensory experience, because by tasting things, that's the only way you know if they're good or not. There's only so much we can tell by sight in terms of quality. And in those sensory classes, just like on the cupping table, we really use our noses a lot more than our palates or our tongues. So I like to smell everything that I taste. The body has improved a lot. So I still have a lot of bright acidity. I'm actually going to give one of these to Nick because I know that he likes brightness.
Yes. Come on. Come on. Thank you.
So this is a really bright, nice espresso, but the body is still nice and medium weight, and I've really chased away that lingering bitterness. It's almost like a hard fruit candy, where it's got like a nice bit of tartness, but kind of a blast of cane sugar. It's really, really good. The finish is clean. You have like coffee aftertaste, not like a specific fruit note. It's just sort of general, like red fruit, orange fruit. Just a good blend. Blends should be approachable. People should be able to drink them on their own, but I can taste this and I know that if I added 12 or 16 ounces of steamed milk, which is very normal for a high volume cafe, that this is still gonna give a lot of flavor to that drink. In fact, some of that really dark chocolate note is gonna lighten up and sweeten up considerably in a lot of milk. The lactose, the sugars from the milk are gonna turn that into a milk chocolate, but it's still heavy enough and kind of big enough flavors that it's still gonna be really coffee dominant, which is another kind of special term that we look for when we're thinking about milk drinks. All right. So, one really small change on those parameters made a pretty big difference. But like I said, that coffee was already pretty close to being dialed in, and I was just kind of thinking about what I was trying to accomplish there before I went for it. You've always got to have a plan, right? Joe and Derek talk about that when they go into roasting for the first time. You never approach your roaster thinking, oh, we'll just see what happens with this coffee, right? Coffee is a valuable resource. We spend a lot of money on it. It takes a lot of work to grow, to produce, and to get it to the country where you are consuming it. And a lot of people worked really hard on it. So to go into a roast without a plan, I think is very wasteful. And in some ways, it could be a little disrespectful because you're saying, you know, my part of this equation doesn't matter much. If I ruin it, who cares? I try to get baristas to sort of think about themselves as being a really important piece of that puzzle too. If you don't have a plan on bar and you're just kind of winging it, you're pretty much guaranteed to fail or to brew a bad coffee. And then all that work that happened before you got it was really for nothing. It kind of all goes out the window. So I think the baristas have a very, very major role to play and a lot of weight on their shoulders in terms of responsibility. But that's also why this job can be fun and exciting because you have a lot of control. So I want to get into pulling this single origin Aricha. And I'm working with a very different grinder. This Mazzer adjusts very differently. We control a lot of the those adjustments in a different way. I've worked on both of these grinders in shops for a really long time, so I feel very comfortable with both of them. But there's a few things that I want to watch out for that I'll talk about kind of during my process. Whenever I approach a new grinder on bar or a new coffee on bar, I just polish out of it exactly where it's sitting, just to kind of gauge where I am, because I want to know what my starting point is. I've had this happen in classes a lot where maybe I'm doing a practical test, so I'm asking a barista to dial in, and they'll come in and they'll say, oh, this number is not right, and this collar should be over here, and they'll make like a bunch of adjustments before they've tried the coffee. And I always think that's a crazy thing to do because you don't know what other variables were changed too. You have to see where you're starting. So I'm going to grab a dose. See what our weight's at. Also 17 grams. Man, the smell of that is very fruity. Yeah. I was looking at our flavor descriptors. We have these coffees available as greens on our green coffee page on our website. And we've got great flavor descriptors for aroma, for flavor, for body, for aftertaste. And a berry note, either a type of berry or just the word berry, is listed on this page 9 times. So I'd say berry is pretty prevalent. origin. Usually with single origins, I'm looking for a slightly faster extraction. I don't think that there needs to be as much contact time as I do with the blend, because I'm really looking for, you know, really distinct, unique, not simple, but sort of all these flavors are going to be equally as accessible as the other ones, right? I don't have some that are extracting slowly and some that are extracting fast. All of these coffees, all the coffees in this hopper were from the same farm. So they should, on an agricultural and biological level, be behaving pretty similarly. The volume of this espresso was similar, so about 3/4 of an ounce in each shot glass for a total volume of 3 ounces, but it extracted in 25 seconds. Still smelling a little of that berry, but I'm also getting a lot of like herbaceous notes. So a little bit of like Christmas tree, pine tree, and some other kind of darker vegetal flavors. Not bad. Wow. Yeah, it tastes like pine. You get a little bit of berry, but it's kind of underripe berry. You know when you have a strawberry or a raspberry that just didn't get sweet enough? You can kind of still taste like the berry note of it, but it's lacking that sugar. I think what I like to do with this coffee is maybe coarsen the grind a little bit, and well, I don't want to change too much at once. Let's see. It's a little tart, right? Which I mentioned earlier. Tartness, acidity, usually means a little bit of under extraction. So I want to find a way to extract a little bit more and kind of get to more of the sugars that are in the coffee. Sugars are solids that are going to kind of come out last. When we look at an extraction curve, we tend to see acidity or acids get extracted first, and then bitterness, bitter compounds really get extracted second, and then sugars tend to come out during the tail end. So my sense is that we haven't really extracted enough of the sweetness of this coffee yet. So by coarsening the grind or opening it up a little bit, I'm going to speed up the extraction and still try to get to the same finishing volume, the same output in a little bit less time or the same time. We'll see what happens. One thing I watch out for with the Mazzer grinder is I don't like to make an adjustment while the motor is sitting still. If you think about the flat burrs that are inside this machine, at a resting point like this, they really still have coffee in between them. So if I go to move them closer together by turning this adjustment collar tighter, then I'm really pushing those coffee beans together, and I could potentially really jam the machine up and kind of wedge a bunch of coffee in between. That's going to make it hard to adjust. It could also kind of seize the motor. I've seen that happen. So I think about it like riding my bike. I change gears while I'm pedaling, right? So I'm going to move the grinder on, I'm going to move the adjustment collar here while the motor is running and while coffee is running smoothly across those burrs. To do that, I usually grab a cup or a small cupping bowl. I'm going to be pulling the adjustment collar counterclockwise, so I'm going to be moving this knob a little bit towards me, and I'm going to do that while I'm hitting this manual dose button, just the little finger button. It's going to be a very small adjustment. Oh no, I'm going to go clockwise. Sorry, I said I was going to go coarser, so I'm going to be pushing it away from me. So it's going to be a very small adjustment because on the Mazzers we know that a small adjustment here at the adjustment collar makes a big difference on the machine. It's not really the case for the K30. For the K30 I can make quite a sizable adjustment, usually like a half number at a time, and then that's typically a pretty good adjustment. Ooh, almost spilled it. That last little bit, again, just to purge through, kind of catch up with that adjustment that I just made. Make sure that all of the coffee that was in between those burrs before, that was that other particle size, that other grind size, has been flushed out. And I've got some nice coffee grounds there. Same thing's happening with these coffee beans. The way that Derek developed the profile is, I've actually got some numbers that we can share if you were not watching on Monday. This coffee was charged at 360 degrees, and it finished the green to yellow, the sort of drying phase, at 5 minutes 30 seconds. It entered first crack at 9:15, and that was at 385. And then he dropped this coffee at 10:45 at about 398 degrees. So overall, the development time was 1.5 minutes after first crack, which allowed that coffee bean to really be sort of saturated with heat, really give off that last remaining bit of moisture, and really enter into a really great sort of caramelization phase, you know, experiencing Maillard, all of those great things that happen in a roaster. This kind of stuff, for a lot of baristas, they don't really get to learn about, right? And so when they have a coffee that is vegetal or extracts really fast or is kind of harsh or sharp or acrid, they just think, oh, I'm probably not doing something right, right? For roasters, they might just think that they totally nail that profile or that espresso blend, and then they send it to, you know, a barista, and maybe the barista isn't really well trained on how to make changes with their variables on bar. I think these conversations between the two, this back and forth, if you'll excuse me, is super important. And I think it is something that our industry is really missing, is having people who work on both sides of the bar and back of house really talking to each other about what they're noticing. Also gives you more stuff to talk about with your customers. I know my customers have always asked roast questions, and over my career as a barista, I have not always been able to answer them. Cool. So one other thing that happens when you make a sizable grind adjustment on your grinder is this really crazy thing. Grind size affects our dose. We were out here pulling shots at the beginning of the week, and I was kind of complaining about how someone kept changing the grind on this K30 and making it really, really coarse. I think that they were doing that because the shots were running slower than they wanted, and they wanted to make the shots run faster. But what they were doing in the process was actually increasing their dose quite a bit too. If you think about your burrs, when you're making your grind coarser, you're moving them farther apart. So in the same amount of time, a lot more coffee can get through. So if you're ever on bar and you notice, man, I really changed that grind, I really coarsened it up and opened it up, but my extraction time hasn't changed at all, it may be because you've actually increased your dose at the same time. That's why when I'm dialing in, I try to always weigh every shot to make sure that I'm tracking those changes. In this case, I want to get rid of those extra 2 grams. It was dosing 19 grams. I want to get back to 17 grams because I don't want to change 2 variables at once. I really want to taste just that grind adjustment. So now I'm back to 17 grams, and I'm going to tamp and pull that shot. See what happens. Whew. A little bit of a faster drop time. This espresso's really moving. Might be too fast. I'm gonna let it go to 2 ounces. Yeah. We'll taste it. It's a little quick. This is like a 17-second shot. For the sake of learning, I'll say why not. It looks beautiful. Like herbal tea. Really fast and really hot. We got all that hot water flowing through that portafilter very, very quickly, and basically not giving it time to cool down means that that shot is just really rolling. Instead of making a grind adjustment, I'm going to kind of work with the machine and try another espresso with that full dose. So actually increasing the dose, giving myself a little more coffee to hopefully slow that extraction down, and maybe kind of split the difference between under extraction and over extraction. We'll see. Any questions yet?
Lots of discussion.
Yeah?
Luke wants to know why you don't keep, I know it's a bit Espresso 101, but why you don't like to keep your coffee pucks in the group heads or in the portafilter?
That's a habit. So the question was why I don't keep coffee pucks in the portafilters or in the group heads. That's a habit that I actually adopted when I became a trainer. Also, don't drop your dry towel on the floor several times like I've done. When I was working in a really, really high volume cafe and we were just pulling shot after shot after shot, I never worried about it. Myself and my coworkers would often talk about like thermal stability, which is a very fancy word of saying like everything stays hotter if you've got another mass of coffee in here and you're keeping your portafilters nice and preheated. So I really got into the habit of leaving my pucks in the portafilters sort of throughout the shift, because it was really only going to be a few minutes before I was back pulling another espresso. When I switched to a training lab where we were only pulling a few shots during a class and then getting back to lecture and theory, I started thinking about those pucks sitting and really baking against those baskets and those screens for an extended period of time. And that's when you're going to get that kind of caked on oil. And those oils do go rancid. I know it probably doesn't happen in an hour or several hours, but you start to taste that kind of old coffee from the shot before kind of baking into the screen, that dispersion screen, and you can get some of those residual flavors. It's also good for today because we're pulling two really different types of coffee. This natural Aricha might as well be a flavored coffee because it's so fruity. And so if I had just pulled that, I let that cake kind of sit in there and like saturate that group head and that portafilter, and then I knocked it out and pulled a blend, I think, you know, a really good taster might be able to taste that. So I think it's a good idea to keep everything empty, keep everything clean, and then you're ready to go. When you walk up to the machine, you don't have to clean up after your last espresso. All right. So again, a little bit more coffee. This one is reading at 18, might be like 18.5. And I'm just gonna go ahead and pull that slightly higher dose. I'm still okay with it extracting fast. I do want it to slow down a little bit slower than where we were at last time, which it looks like it might just kind of get there, just barely. That was about 18 seconds, a little bit of a higher volume. I'm gonna taste this last shot. This Ethiopia is a very dense coffee. It's not the smallest African coffee I've ever seen. Sometimes you can get really, really small coffees, which are super dense. And that would also kind of factor into how I dial it in. That's quite a bit better. I'm spitting it out because it's 5 o'clock in the evening. I'm kind of back into like this fruit juice arena, but having chased away a lot of that herbaceousness that I got in the first shot. This is full of cranberry. It's still pretty light-bodied, but it's juicy and fruity in a really pleasant way. It has a little bit of syrupy sweetness, kind of like pomegranate syrup, which can be really tart if you've had that before. But it has a really quick and clean finish and is a really nice single origin. So this setup with both these grinders having two really different machines is pretty common for what you'll see on an espresso bar at a specialty store. They might have something that they're highlighting as an SOE, a single origin espresso, and they really like it on its own or in a macchiato. And then they've got their house blend, their workhorse. And these are coffees that are going into all the milk drinks, all the Americanos, all the mochas. You know, baristas really need to be checking into these grinders throughout the day. A lot of times baristas will ask me like, well, how many times do you taste your shots? And honestly, if it's a 6 or 7 hour shift, probably I'll stop and just check my dial every 2 or 3 hours. And probably other baristas would tell you that they do it way more than that. But again, looking back towards the beginning of my career, when my first boss at my first espresso job said, don't even taste it, espresso is totally gross, I think we've come a long way. So I hope some of this is helpful. For me, having watched Derek roast these coffees on Monday, I was here during our first video that we did earlier this week, and understanding a lot more of his process, it kind of had me thinking about how I would probably try to pull them as shots. And I think that helped a lot, helped me kind of walk into today's video with a better game plan, which, as I said, is very important. So let's see if we have any other questions while I kind of tidy up here. Could talk a little bit more.
You have been fantastic.
Yeah. Can I say thank you from the roaster's perspective?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I don't think I've ever seen my coffee treated as well. Like watching you do this, I can't even really tell you how much it affected me.
That's awesome.
It's really crazy, dude. And I already have an idea of how I need to manipulate the roast on the single origin.
Yeah.
Well, that's next episode. So we should,
So tune in next time.
Yeah.
No, I think, we want to keep doing stuff like this, and we really want to hear from all of you. Like I said, there's a lot of videos out there that show you how to make coffee. Probably quite a few videos now out there that show you how to roast coffee. But the connection is the important part. That's where people start to make money, right? Understanding how they've roasted coffee and then how baristas are going to pull it or how they're going to pull it for customers. That's where the experience really sort of gets connected. My classes do teach you how to pull shots and steam milk, but they also teach you, how to develop a blend, how to build your menu, what non-dairy milks you should have on bar. All of that stuff that I've learned after working in retail and wholesale for a really long time. But helping roasters understand what baristas think about and vice versa is really why I'm here.
Can I get a shot of Aricha?
Yeah.
Super. Want to do a sign up? Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.